Okay, if we have time, I want to circle back to what you found from that because
Okay.
as a poverty point supremacist, I want to talk about it as much as possible. In this interview, I'm talking to my friend JT Lewis. He's a PhD candidate at Oklahoma, and he was recently part of a panel discussion at the SAA that covered the disconnect between academic archaeology and professional archaeology, and what professors, professional companies, and students might do to correct some of those issues. Okay, so just to like set this up, what a lot of people outside of archaeology don't know, and a lot of archaeology students, I'm shocked to find, don't know, is that the vast majority of people who work in the archaeological profession are not affiliated with the university or the academy. Most of us are employed in the private sector in what's called cultural resource management or CRM, and this is these consulting firms handle everything from survey to excavation to reporting of these archaeological materials. And this is the vast majority of archaeologists in the country. It's
Yeah.
not a minority. And our client base ranges from it's anytime federal money is spent. So Department of Defense, Department of Transportation, oil and natural gas, anything with like those kinds of subsidies or federal money, we're involved in all of that ground disturbance.
Yeah.
And like I said, I've got some serious problems with uh, the university's failure to engage with that aspect of archaeology as a whole, because it's most of it, and they're not really training students to uh, to be fluent in the skill set needed to do that. You and I come from very different universities. I've been to three separate ones, and I think you've been to two or three separate
Yeah. I've been to
universities.
two.
Yeah, so like, and our experience from our conversations has been basically the same. The academy is not training students to do field work. They're training students to be students in perpetuity.
Yeah. The one of the benefits I had for my master's, so now that I'm on my PhD, the university I went to for my master's, it was a terminal master's program. And one of the big benefits I had through that is that Ed had his own CRM firm. And so the students throughout the master's worked CRM. He took smaller projects, so we had 1 or 2 day projects, and then over breaks or over the summer, we had, larger phase ones and the um, occasional phase twos and things like that. And he actually taught several CRM classes through that, which was beneficial. The Ed has retired though, and so since then, it has not been kept up in that. And the where I am now at the University of Oklahoma, uh, they at the graduate level, there is one class that they teach on CRM, but it's CRM is such a big complex thing, from not only setting up the what kind of surveys being done, the background, the MOA, the API, the to doing the field work, to writing the reports, to doing the analysis. Um, it's kind of too much to try to fit into one class. And that class is also just at the graduate level. So the you know bachelor's degree individuals who come field techs and then crew chiefs and things like that aren't exposed to that. They're kind of just thrown in there with a kind of the mentality of they'll learn it on the job. Which there's some things that can only be learned on the job, but it doesn't need to be everything.
Right. And just to if students aren't being taught field work trade skills, what are they being taught? Because it's not nothing. They like there's a lot of important information that is being taught in these classrooms. Our point is generally that it's just very one-sided.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah. There's a lot of theory-based classes in the kind of the academic pipeline right now, which theory is very important still. And I mean, even and in CRM, you still use theory.
Oh, for
It's just
sure.
that so much of it is just theory based or kind of the research interest of the professors and things like that, that it's not developing the students who become field techs or, end up going to grad school to become, project archaeologists or program directors or PIs and things like that. Those skills aren't being developed enough in the kind of academic pipeline, so that way when they come out, they're prepared to take those jobs. Instead, they're have a lot of theory, and it's almost created. And I talked about this on the panel. It's kind of created this thing to where when the students come out now, they're so frustrated at this because they're so theory based that they don't see the value in theory because it becomes like an enemy because it didn't prepare them for the job. So they get so focused on the CRM, but really theory is still very important. It's just there needs to be a match of the theory with, CRM, what the work's going to be done, especially with, I mean, not including the amount of field techs and things like that. It's like 85% of all archaeologists in the US are uh, CRM archaeologists, and that doesn't include field techs. If you include that field tech number, it's going to be like 99%.
Yeah, exactly. And like if we've got the pyramid of what archaeology is, that foundation is the field tech. And my big frustration is that we're not teaching the fundamentals. Like when I had field school, I was taught field school almost from the perspective of like a trade, like a stonemason or a
Yeah.
bricklayer or a carpenter or something like that. Like these are skills that you need to have and you need to be able to do them well. And it's not just, cutting profiles and laying out units, um, like lithic identification, knowing the difference between a rhyolite and a chert, ceramics, being able to identify and notate what temper agent and exterior patterning you're seeing. Knowing the historic artifacts because we don't get to just pick and choose uh, which kinds of sites we document when we find them. Like we need to be able to identify like glass types and nail types and all of the many historic ceramic types.
Yeah.
And I'm not seeing the emphasis being placed on these fundamental baseline skills that every level of archaeologist needs to have.
Yeah. And there's kind of been a big discussion recently too that with a lot of archaeologists, they've become, at least academic archaeologists, have become very centralized. So they become very good experts on their particular research, and they're really, really good at it, amazing at it. But the drawback to that is that means the other things have slipped. And in the U.S., at least, most archaeologists are, what we call pre-contact, pre-Columbian, colonial periods. And because of that, there's very few historic uh, methodologies that are taught and how to record historic things or historic artifacts and things like that. And it's like you said, it's one thing that we don't get to, in the field, we don't get to pick if we, run into or not. And it's almost become, at least in Oklahoma, it's almost become a problem too, because there's this whole thing where in a lot of these like pipeline surveys and stuff like that we have out here, um, a good portion of that will have these old slabs from where the old oil wells are and things like that. And we are now hitting the point to where those are historic. They're hitting the 50-year mark and they're everywhere. And so if you have a bunch of field techs that don't know how to properly record a historic structure and things like that, it takes and a kind of frustrating, like on the job when we're supposed to be doing, our transects of stopping to go show a new fresh field tech how to record historic features and things like that because they may be very good at and learned at a field school how to dig a post hole and record a post hole. But these historic features and artifacts and things like that, there's just kind of a lack of training in it because that's not what a lot of archaeologists and academic archaeologists specialize in. But there's a lot of historic archaeology out there, and if you're not well-rounded enough, that's always going to be more time consuming, or if you're a PI or anything like that, something you have to now teach, or if you're a lab director, something now you have to teach on the job instead. Um, and so that's always been kind of a thing that a lot of the kind of general archaeologists, which is one of the benefits of that's a big benefit in CRM, is kind of knowing um, you know how to identify, like you said, glass, World War II, World War One glass, based on the bubbles, the material, and also being able to know, okay, this is chert, this is quartzite, saying this is grog temper, this is shell temper. Having that ability to do that is really valuable in CRM. And with that, a lot of these general things are kind of going away. And it's, in one sense, it is kind of the academia's fault, but it's like we've also kind of dug ourselves into it to where in archaeology, as a lot of programs are shrinking or not being able to rehire, programs that once maybe had a historic archaeologist and a pre-contact archaeologist are losing some of those archaeologists. So they may just have pre-contact or just historic. So the students then aren't being able to be exposed to a lot. So we've kind of dug ourselves into a hole that hopefully, as this becomes a bigger issue and these universities see it, and there is some hope out there that we can see. And give me just a second. Can you hear the cutting the grass?
No, not really.
Okay, sorry, there's neighbors cutting the grass. That we can really see that there's a shift to making people who are based our CRM, and there's actually a couple of CRM master's programs that are primarily online because it's targeting people who are already in CRM that are happening that I think is kind of, we're starting to right the ship, but it's kind of, we're just now starting to right the ship. And because of that, it's going to still be bad for a while, but hopefully as some of these programs that are opening up these CRM based graduate programs that I know some that have just recently opened up and are getting a ton of applicants. People see that success that those CRM based programs or classes are, and that really like heightens that other programs need to do this.
Yeah, and that's really cool. And my friend Jeff Johnson, he actually I think just finished in the last year or so his master's at one of those programs in Maryland, which, like you say, it's mostly online and they're pulling in students from all over the country, which is kind of weird to have like archaeologists working in North Carolina and archaeologists working in Utah doing a CRM oriented master's program in the same place because
Yeah.
the methodologies are radically different, the materials are radically different. But it's good that we're starting to see more of that kind of more vocational elements to the education.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, it's still only at the grad level. And kind of one of the points that you made during the forum was that, 90% of every, of your students as a professor are going to go into CRM at some point. And for the 10% that aren't going to go into CRM and actually end up in a professorship, 90% of their students are going to
Yeah.
end up in CRM at some point. So when I've had professors look me in the eye and say, "We are not a trade school. We are here to train future archaeologists." Well, archaeology trade schools don't exist, and so until they do, yes, you are the trade school until we start having archaeology trade schools. Which
Yeah.
I think you were absolutely right. If we started to have associate's degrees that were methodology oriented associate's degrees that you can get in 2 years and go to work and know what you're doing in the field at a tech level. Everything else can come later, but at a tech level, you know what you're about. I can only see benefit to the health of the field for that, because then, the academic programs can stay in their lane and do their academic thing, but we've also got the trade schools that can teach you how to do the work.
Yeah. I think too, one of the benefits I see, because there's that archaeology, associate's degree, these trade and tech degrees have started showing up in California, and I'm
And
hoping,
Colorado a little bit.
and Colorado, okay,
Yeah.
yeah, and I'm hoping that spreads because I think it kind of addresses multiple issues in the field. One is that at a PhD level, there's not enough jobs. There's very few jobs, and it's an extremely competitive market, and I think, and because of that, a lot of PhDs end up going into CRM because that's where the jobs are. And if those individuals, now that they have CRM experience, if there's, they still want to teach and things like that, that is where the job market on their end for this oversaturation of PhDs can be met, where you've got PhDs in now with CRM experience can find jobs at these, everywhere, in at least in the Southeast, there's 20 to 30, community colleges in the state in comparison to, your maybe 3 universities or your 4 universities. So that can help address that market. But the other thing too is on the CRM side, field techs, especially as these, infrastructure bills and stuff like that comes in, that money is coming in. There's more projects that's needed, and there's a plenty of places that need techs. I get, you know, CRM companies routinely asking me, "Hey, do you have a student that's about to graduate? Do you have somebody that that's good enough to that we can hire for this project?" Because there is a um, field tech shortage on a lot of these projects, and I know in some places, uh, some of the lab, in a lot of cases, lab and uh, field techs, you kind of swap out. Sometimes you get to work in the lab, sometimes you don't. But some of the places that I knew originally just had lab staff are now having to pull that lab staff into the field because they're hurting for field techs for some of these projects. And I think with an associate's degree, you can, you know, hit some of the both markers that we're kind of missing in the field, and that's that we don't have enough techs and we have an oversaturation of PhDs. Now, it's not going to fix everything, but I think if we can just make where for a field tech you just need an associate's degree from a trade school, then that gets out. And for most trade schools, especially now, depending on the trade, the pay and things like that for a field tech are kind of what you would expect from a 2 year program. So I think it would line up very well going through.
Yeah, for absolute sure. And then if you want to get bumped into like crew chief territory, associates with enough experience, I think that's not inappropriate. But then when you start getting into field directing and stuff, like you really need a higher degree of training because of the theoretical aspects of it.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah, I think the same thing too with like things like specialists. Actually, I usually when I'm doing when I did most of this data collecting for it, the roles that I looked at primarily were field tech, crew chief, uh, specialist, and field director because I think those are the primary ones that you can hit with a BA. In some cases, depending on the company or depending on the project, you may need an MA. But for most of like the phase ones and the phase ones reports, or sorry, the phase ones analysis and things like that, I think those are all the roles that could be hit by either an associate's degree on like the field tech and crew chief plus some experience, and then with a BA, a specialist in a lab looking, like a lithics or a grog or sorry, ceramics, and then field director, once they come out, got that experience and things like that, can meet that field director thing, and you need a BA. And I think that also would help now too, because I think one of the major things that I see a lot is with early CRM professionals, so they're kind of just in their career. They don't see how the upward mobility to degree kind of correlates to one another. And so, in a lot of times, they're like, okay, I need a BA for at least for a field tech and crew chief, and then everything else is a master's degree. But there's many different tiers of CRM positions, and having them so like joined in on just like a master's degree doesn't really help students kind of like when they're going into these graduate programs going, okay, this is what I want to be, so this is what I need to know. And so I think having that kind of, having that associate degree creates a more split kind of ranking of job positions that'll help students kind of get in and out of graduate programs faster because they know what they want, they know what they need for it, and kind of going to that next level.
That's another thing that constantly comes up when I'm in universities and stuff is people talking about, I want to do a year of CRM before I go to grad school. And that's a very small percentage, by the way, and it drives me nuts that like everyone seems to want to go straight from undergrad into grad school because of obviously it does improve your marketability, but it just kind of seems ridiculous to me that you would go into a graduate program not knowing what the reality of work is outside. Like when I was first thinking about grad school and undergrad, I was thinking about specializing in like archaeological musical instruments or things like that that I would never encounter outside of my graduate research and like nothing else. You need to see what you actually encounter in the field in order to get a good sense of what a valuable marketable advanced degree looks like and what that would be.
Yeah, I think there's seeing master students come in and things like that. It's really easy to see the ones that have CRM experience compared to the ones that don't, because the ones that come in with CRM experience, they're like, I want to do this and I want to get this job afterwards. That's their primary things. A lot of the ones that come in with CRM experience are like, okay, I want to study Mississippian pottery. I've been working in the Southeast and I want to get a master's degree so I can become a PI at a CRM firm. Where when you see things like students coming just directly from a BA to a master's program, there's a lot of kind of, they're not sure what quite they want to do. They just want to research archaeology, which that's great. And like, I love that they have that passion, but kind of in the world we live in type of thing, it's beneficial to have that experience of knowing what CRM is like. And a lot of programs don't offer that. So that way, when they come in, they're not kind of floundering for a year. And then their second year, they're like, oh my gosh, I need to pick a project. And then being exposed, now that they're more exposed to like maybe just like coming to conferences or talking to other people and things like that, they now see that, they're a year behind where they should have been, and they end up taking 3 years to graduate anyway, which would have been the same amount of time if they worked somewhere and then came in and things like that. And there's one of the things that I think you may have had left by this point. One of the things I think CRM companies, because there's a lot of kind of issues with the way academia is, but I think there's some kind of fundamental things that CRM companies could do too that could address these things as well. One of the major things that I have an issue with CRM companies is CRM companies will pay for booths at archaeological conferences, so they'll have their CRM booths. But in most cases, like at SAA or SEAC or Southwest Symposium, these bigger conferences and things like that, bachelor students aren't there. You're only really getting master or PhD level students in those cases. I would love to see CRM companies, instead of buying those booths and having those booths at conferences, have them at career fairs at universities, or talk to. And this is one thing I'm working on now with several universities and several CRM companies. Just come in and talk with, like, there's almost all the universities have like anthropology clubs where come in and talk to people, and so that way the students know what they need should learn. Because um, if on the academic end, if they're not being taught, and then the CRM companies, if you're just complaining about those skills not being taught, but then the students don't know that they need those skills either, then that's on you too. Like, come in, tell the students this is the things if you know how to do this, how, your how to do a survey, walk a transect, know how to do like in-field analysis of lithics or pottery or things like that, and then that way those students can learn those skills and pressure the universities to let those be taught. Then they'll come out with some foundation, and then that's less train time for the CRM companies. So that's one thing that's been kind of frustrating that I've been seeing too, is I'll see, 30 booths for CRM companies, and I'm like, man, you know what? When I would have loved to see that at a college day career fair, especially in some of these towns where that or some of these places where like CRM has a big hold on what's going on anyway in there. I would love to see some of that, because that would have helped so many students not only find jobs after uh, they get their bachelor's, but students who are thinking about going into a graduate program, they can already be in talk with CRM companies about what skills they would need. So that way, when they finish, they're not just coming out at a field tech level. And so, one thing that I've been doing is I've been bringing in interns and then talking with CRM companies about getting them while they're still working on their bachelor's or something like that to get incorporated with those CRM companies. So that way, when they're finished with their bachelor's, and if they can, go straight to being a field tech, or they're already in talks. So when they go, if they want to go straight from bachelor's to master's, they've already been working for a CRM company when they get in for a master's, and they go in and going, okay, this is what this CRM firm said would make me, go beyond a crew chief level, where I'm being a field director, or, a monitor, or project archaeologist, something like that. These are the skills I need to, and so they have them beforehand, because I think right now CRM agencies and firms like that are too reactive. They're not tackling the issue soon enough, and then so they're just dealing with the consequences of it, and then in a lot of cases complaining about it. But help tackle the issue before it happens, and then everyone wins in that
Yeah.
situation too. And so I definitely think that there's a lot of things kind of on all sides in archaeology. I think that like the field of archaeology needs to do some changes, but both that um, academics and CRM need to kind of stop always thinking themselves as different entities, and realize that they both need to tackle the issue together. And I think doing that would actually solve a lot of problems in both what we're seeing at like issues in like programs kind of losing a lot of their funding or not getting these new jobs back, and then CRM companies having to do so much in the field training.
Yeah, because it is a real problem that we will typically get, brand new people who, just maybe just graduated, the day before they show up to work, and they haven't been taught basic artifact identification. We have to babysit them for a couple of days to make sure that they know what they're looking for in a
Yeah.
lot of cases. I had one situation where I hit a positive and I called some people over to come look at it because it was this really gnarly quartz biface that split along a incipient fracture plane. And I showed it to one of the other techs, and she was like, I would have thrown that away. I would have thought that was a rock. I would not have known that was an artifact. I still am not sure what I'm looking at. Like, and that's a very real thing that we see coming out of a lot of a lot of bachelor students.
Hmm.
So but I also think you're right that the internship thing, the paid internship has the has a lot of power to change this situation because it opens up a line of communication, right? You've got this undergraduate student who's working in a CRM company over the summers and in afternoons and stuff doing lab work and so on. And then they're going back to class and talking to the classmates. Like that, it opens that conversation between the two worlds at a grassroots level. That I see a huge amount of value in. And like they're paid interns, they're getting paid a reasonable wage, but they're not
Yeah.
getting paid the same thing that a graduated field technician is getting paid. So it's not necessarily like it's not free labor, it's slightly cheaper labor.
Yeah.
But it's labor that's being trained to do their job.
Yeah, and I think that's one of the big things too, because I mean, I did when I was in bachelor's. A lot of students work part-time jobs, and so having these connections where CRM companies can get these, interns and things like that, paid interns. I don't like free labor in any sense, um, but get these paid interns. That way, not only are they better prepared, but you're targeting in a lot of cases, those CRM companies are targeting the things that they're missing in a lot of cases, especially if they've been working with someone from an undergrad or before they even finish their undergrad to when they're, you know, graduated with a master's. There's someone that's been, in a lot of cases, 3, 4 years with the company by the time they finish their master's. Okay, well then that is a person you, as a CRM company, have helped to develop to target an area that you need. And I think that's been really, really beneficial. And there's usually, in most cases, the students that I've had that went out and have interned for these CRM companies, there's usually a lot of simpler tasks that by having someone, an intern do it, that's less budget constraints on the CRM company because you can pay your a lab specialist to rough sort, or and be spending $24, $26 an hour on that person, or an intern at $15 to do the same thing because it's not a it's something you need to learn, but it's not such a difficult task that an undergraduate intern couldn't do that.
Yeah.
And putting together like site files requests, that's one of the big ones here, and it's something that a lot of the undergraduate interns have that do. That's just kind of the beginnings of things, getting these site file requests in and things like that. But it also gets the student familiar with the Section 106 process, and the vast majority of things um, are based on that Section 106 process. And in a lot of cases, for a student, those internships can make them both marketable for CRM, or if they're getting really involved in the Section 106 process, federal, state archaeology jobs, because a lot of those are based on less of the field work and more of Section 106 archaeological laws and standards and things like that. And so if they get exposed to it early, that where you come out, and that's one of the big things that I see a lot of master students have trouble with is those job interviews for those federal positions and things like that. Is most of the questions are related to Section 106. And so if you're not taught those or you're not familiar with those for those interviews, it doesn't matter if there's, a boon in, how many Forest Service archaeologist jobs there are. They need someone that's going to know Section 106 because in a lot of cases, you may just have one or two archaeologists for like a national forest somewhere. And because of that, you're going to be directly stepping into a leadership position on a, government consultation level. And so even if you've got that master's and they're desperate for someone, they need someone that knows Section 106 or the person's not going to be able to do their job. And in a lot of those cases where you're, on site for like those national forest job or forest service jobs and things like that, you don't have someone with you that can show you the on the job training. So they need someone that's already trained. So getting these interns in and something as simple as, site file requests at least get them exposed to the Section 106 process. And so that way they're more likely to get jobs in the future, even, as they get into the graduate degrees.
Yes. Okay. Do you want to talk a little bit about some of that survey information that came through and like what just broad strokes, the kind of questions that were being asked and the kind of answers that you were getting back?
Yeah, so I was requested to do this panel as a discussant. The panel was from the Government Affairs Committee with the SAA, the Society of American Archaeology. It focused on professionalization and possible changes that may be coming to the SOI standard. So SOI is a Secretary of Interior, and those kind of determine who can write archaeological reports, who can lead archaeological projects, and things like that. And so these were based on kind of a survey of what the field is currently like and what area, trying to target areas that need improvement as SOI standards may be changing. So this way, as a entity, SAA and primarily the Government Affairs Committee could make a statement on recommendations to the Secretary of Interior about changes. And so I was brought in. There was three discussants brought in. One was she owned a CRM company. The other was an academic professor from University of Texas who studied at an applied anthropology degree. So things like where they're teaching more how to work in CRM, and they actually have a CRM company that you work in as you get your degree. And then I was brought in as kind of a student representative that already had a CRM background, so to try to tackle each one of these issues. The things that I really focused on is where was this disconnect going for students and young professionals who had just entered the job market. And so one of the big things that popped out was that we sent out this survey and we had over 1,000 respondents to it. In this, 100% of academics marked that they were either interested in teaching CRM classes or were teaching CRM classes. And so with that, you would assume then that the students' answers would match with that. But what we actually saw was only about half of them had been at a university that offered a CRM company. And in a lot of cases, because we knew where the data was coming from, we knew that these are recipients from the same universities in these cases. But what was even more kind of concerning is based on that, a large majority, or a little over half the students that had actually taken a CRM class had responded that it wasn't useful. And so there's this big disconnect where there seems to be that academic archaeologists know that it's important, and even if they may be teaching a class that isn't actually CRM, but they think it's CRM related. We see that a lot in classes that may be registered as like public archaeology and things like that. But public archaeology, while it does cover CRM, it also covers public engagement, collaboration. There's so much of a field kind of going into it. Or the professor, if I'm going to pick on some professors for a while. If you've got you went straight from your PhD where you didn't do CRM into an academic job, and then you've been there for 20 years, you don't have really the skill set to teach a CRM class either. And so that's what we're seeing is that there's this clear disconnect going on between what academics think they're teaching as far as CRM is related and what is actually needed in the job market. And I think one way that can be addressed is, these CRM companies coming into universities and talking with the faculty and talking with the students and saying, like, this is what we're targeting, like, this is what we need on the job market. And it's kind of been this thing too, where all academics know that most archaeologists are going to end up in CRM. It's like it's not a surprise that most archaeologists are CRM archaeologists. But there's still some, not at all universities, but at a lot of universities, there's still this kind of thing to where like CRM is a failure in a lot of cases. But
And I am seeing that attitude change along almost along generational lines.
yeah,
The like Gen X archaeologists and younger tend to be very um much more pro CRM than the older Gen X and earlier
yeah,
archaeologists for sure. Um and I had a weird like unicorn of a situation where one of my committee members was David Anderson, who was a CM archaeologist until he was in his 50s and or actually maybe older before he wound up being a professor. So he was always very gung-ho on CRM. But also his information of what CRM was like was, 20 years out of date. He was talking to a student about like double occupancy hotel rooms. I was like, Dave, we don't do that anymore. That's
yeah,
not a thing.
yeah. And that's kind of the thing too, is I think a lot of the like you were saying, a lot of the younger faculty and things like that, they're very much, that they're the job market is CRM and they want to make sure their students are prepared for that. But then you have the I call them dinosaurs.
We all do.
That yeah, that are up on the top end that are like, okay, well those classes aren't important, or we don't need to spend time teaching those classes. And then and they usually have chair positions, or they're more on like academic committees and things like that inside the universities. And so it's harder for those new, or not even newbies in some cases, like professional, like faculty that's had 10 years experience, to really get those classes taught, because academia as a whole don't see the value in it yet, and then the dinosaurs think that that's still a failure if you end up in CRM.
Yeah, they're
But
actively hostile to it.
yeah, but in most cases, CRM archaeologists make more money than academics. In a lot of cases, if you're especially like targeting like a non R1 university and you're a professor there, you are making less money than if you were a PI at a CR. Like it's in some cases it's substantially less. Um, and so even at like bigger universities and things like that, I know someone who really competitive on the job market. Like universities were like headhunting this individual, and their starting out salary for being headhunted at a big university was 70,000. That's after years of not only like grad school and uh, then uh, you know 6 years PhD, and then post
Publications and yeah.
yeah master level CRM PIs are making more than that. And you also think about, they were making that for 6 to 8 years on top of, till they just finish their masters, and not where you don't make a lot of money as a PhD student. As a PhD student, I can tell you we do not make, we are barely above minimum wage in a lot of cases.
It is a pittance what graduate students are compensated for their time and work.
Yeah. And so, you know, that's another big thing too, is that if you're I hate when they say this, and I listen to some CRM archaeologists or some CRM podcasts and things like that, that like you have to have like this deep passion for things. And yes, you have to have a passion for like history or archaeology and things like that. But honestly, I think the field would kind of benefit if people were just like, CRM is where the money is. Let's focus on getting students the jobs where the money is, because I mean that's where a lot of other uh, academic programs and stuff like that is for hitting those job markets. They're not for making another academic. They're for hitting someone and getting them into a job position where that student's going to make a lot of money. And I think if we kind of took that too and took that approach where we train people for the job market to make that money, that not only is that going to, help the field of archaeology, but I think it's actually going to bring more people in because I think one of the big things that we have kind of in archaeology is like this identity thing, where this identity crisis, where a lot of people don't know what archaeology is, and so when they first come in and take like an intro to archaeology thing, they're thinking like you're going all archaeologists only go and like excavate like Maya plaza temples and all these big things. And so they think it's so rare to be able to get those opportunities because it is that they don't see that, okay, well, if I got an MA, became a PI, oh, I can do, I could live well on that for a while. It's not archaeology isn't the greatest money, but you can make a good living doing that. That would draw more people in than thinking because a lot of people have this like, oh, archaeology is a pipe dream. I'll never be able to go, and excavate at Gobekli Tepe. And you're right, you probably won't, but you can spend a lot of time doing archaeology at some cool, amazing sites that you just weren't familiar with because there's a job market for that. If you target that job market, you can make a good living and do that archaeology that a lot of people are interested in. I mean, you're an archaeology YouTube channel, so that there's a lot of people interested in archaeology. It's just kind of showing we need to do like the field of archaeology needs to do a better job at showing like what archaeology really is and kind of moving away from these
And
grand pictures.
you want to know something weird that I did not expect. I did a couple of videos recently about like kind of rethinking rock shelter use and
Yeah.
how these spaces were being used in the archaic. And it's like really esoteric stuff that I specifically am interested in, which is why I did them. But they both hit 10,000 in like 2 weeks.
Oh wow. Yeah.
Some of the like fastest videos I've had go to 10,000 that weren't about like bitching about Scott Wolter or bitching about Graham Hancock,
Yeah.
were these like really like deep end archaeology theory, social theory videos that for some reason were, people were watching all the way through and got really invested in for whatever reason. So lesson learned on that, do the deep end stuff.
I
Um
mean, I know you had Seth on here, and
yeah.
um, behind me is Mound A from Poverty Point, and Poverty
Hmm.
Point is an amazing site. But some of the most groundbreaking things about Poverty Point and Poverty Point culture and like the people and things like that are from the Jaketown site that they're
Yeah.
working on. It's not actually the Poverty Point site that a lot of this information is coming from. It's from the Jaketown site, and that's they're getting multiple American antiquity and antiquity articles based on stuff happening at Jaketown, not at Poverty Point.
Yeah.
And so that happens a lot. In my own dissertation research, um, I'm looking at a group of hunter gatherers that are not interacting with Poverty Point or not interacting with Hopewell. They're not very mobile. They're very restricted in things. And it's been some kind of groundbreaking stuff that's going on because everyone's thinking about Poverty Point and Hopewell as these huge interactions that's drawing everybody in. And now we're seeing that, okay, well, there's some areas and some people that didn't want to interact in that. And that's telling us a lot more about the past and about kind of this diversity in people in the past because we're not, at least in my research, I'm not focusing on these big sites anymore. I'm actually trying to focus on why are people not interacting with them? Why are people not doing that? And we're kind of seeing this um, shift in where like we talk about there's this thing where like if you go into these big things like the Poverty Point or Hopewell, these big social interactions, you have some kind of debt that you have to pay. Now you may be changing your beliefs or changing your culture and changing your cultural practices and things like that. And by if you don't want to do those things, then you separate yourself from it. You don't get included in it. And so that's really interesting stuff about people in the past. And the reason we're knowing those things is because we're stepping away from looking at, the Poverty Point and Hopewell mound structures, which they're amazing. But if we just focus so much on just those things, we actually don't see a lot of diversity and kind of amazing things that's going on in the past with the people. And if we're just looking at the mega, extraordinary sites and things like that.
Yeah, that
So
like agentive rejection of the major site. Like I've got a few friends who are from Rochester in New York, and the vitriol with which they speak of New York City
yeah,
is kind of reflective of this kind of thing, where you've got these hinterland people who want nothing to do with that. And they want to make a point of showing that they are not related to whatever is going on there.
yeah. I
Um,
in the research I'm doing, there's a with my dissertation, there's just a continuation. So the people start living a certain way during the late Archaic, and then they kind of continue living that way all the way up until the late Woodland. And so the only thing that kind of really changes is they have the pottery adoption, and then even when the adoption of the bow and arrow, they still make the same projectile point like form, just smaller. So like
mhm.
they're even like rejecting other technologies coming in and about like hafted bifaces. They're just making smaller versions of the kind they're used to and things like that. And there seems to be this big, like you were saying, this um, want to not be a part of things like that. I am from the backwoods. If I had a chance to teach an Ivy League, I wouldn't. I don't want to be anywhere near a big city. I don't want to live in one. I want, my space where I've got. I don't want to be a part of big city life and things like that. And I know some people that do, but just for me personally, I don't want that. And it's cool seeing kind of that reflected at back during the late Archaic and the Woodland period. You're seeing people that are and groups of people that kind of the same thing. They didn't want to be involved in those big interactions that are going on. And so, and honestly, I think that tells us a lot more about people in the past than if we only excavated at, if we only excavated at Poverty Point, we'd only know about people who want to be in that, which was a good amount of people, but there's still, you know, a huge areas where people didn't want to be a part of Poverty Point, that they rejected this kind of beliefs and culture, um, traditions that Poverty Point was really focused on. And I think that's just as amazing as kind of what Poverty Point people were doing.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, that like the the diversity of opinion regarding these spaces is more salient from like a social theory level than the spaces themselves, especially when we've beaten the spaces themselves to death. Um, One thing that I want to backtrack to that we haven't covered yet is the the turn towards not just consultation but active collaboration with the Syndic communities within archaeology. Um, and how do we teach that? Because the so many of the people teaching the classes are the ones who have failed to do that in the first place. Um, Short of like direct partnerships between universities and tribal agencies, which is a hard sell because that's a rough, fraught relationship for the last, 200 years since the antiquarians.
Hmm.
Um, like you're working in Oklahoma in the heart of, the indigenous world for the Southeast at least. Do you have any thoughts on like how we better educate our student bodies on how to appropriately interact with indigenous communities?
Yeah, so one of the things that is there's still this is something that I've been trying to address for a long time, because I'm Creole from South Louisiana, and so this has been a big thing that a lot of my research has gone, or a lot of my effort, not so much research has gone into, because there's still archaeology in the past and anthropology in general in the past did a lot of harm, and in some cases still harm indigenous communities. And so there's already a weariness for interaction between the two. I will say that most of the faculty that are probably, I would say, they maybe have like 10 to 15 years experience. They're not anti-collaboration. They just don't know how because their advisors didn't collaborate. Now their advisors, not everyone, but we see a lot of in those cases like those. They're just like they don't see a value in collaboration or value in things like that. And then you have like the current professor to a good stock of the current professors who are for collaboration, but they just don't know how to facilitate it themselves. And so, especially with the younger students now, we're really seeing a push in for more collaboration in those areas. And one of the things that, at least in Oklahoma, we have a couple of things that are going out. One is the Oklahoma Public Archaeology Network, OPAN, and they work a lot with different indigenous communities. There's like pathway programs for indigenous students to be brought in over the summers, or high school students to be brought in, indigenous high school students to be brought in over the summers to work with archaeologists and anthropologists, and so to establish those relationships. There's events at uh, a lot of the uh, fairly recognized tribes in Oklahoma have like cultural centers or and things like that. And so there's like trips for anthropology undergraduates and graduate students to go there and interact with them. But this is definitely something that I think one of the best ways that it can start being handled is replacing the old faculty, the dinosaurs that just kind of won't retire. As they kind of move out, there's people that are going to be coming in that already have that collaboration and effort going and things like that, that they're going to bring in with them when they come in. And that's been the big thing. So I work closely with several tribes now. And so, if I end up in academia somewhere and I bring in students for things like that, I can introduce them to these upcoming students and things like that. But one of the big things is in most cases, the things that the tribes really want is they want a relationship with with the people, with the students or things like that. So in a lot of cases, I think of the kind of fault where a lot of like incoming master students and things like that kind of have where they like, I really want to focus on collaboration with my master's thesis and things like that. They think about it in that term, like what kind of research, it's like research oriented still. Now they're coming out
Like
with the
they want a working relationship with
yeah,
these people, but what I have experienced is like these, indigenous people want a personal relationship
yes.
before we start trying to figure out what work we want to do together.
And there's so much, especially like I talked about, like anthropology and archaeology, that's been used like early informants and things like that during kind of like the beginning of anthropology and sometimes even up until today. Those things that they shared, those research things were like taken from the community, or the community was used to kind of bolster the stock of an academic who was trying to rise through the ranks and stuff like that. And so there needs to be that trust there before you can ever get to kind of this working relationship. There has to be a level of trust there. And I think that's something that a lot of incoming students that are focused on collaboration, and it's great that they are, but they need to understand that there needs to be a relationship there first. In most cases, like I'm working, so the archaeological culture that I work on is it's called the Fushmaline culture, which is the pre-Caddo. And so we have Caddo Nation now. I've spent 4 years just talking and interacting, dancing, different activities like that with Caddo people. And I just now have requested, after 4 years, requested that we do a small project together. They've been aware of my research the whole time. I've always been open and things like that, but I've always been just interacting with them. Like I said, we'll eat together. I've danced with them and things like that. And just now, like they don't know me. Like most of them now, like we just text because it's not, I don't have to send out a formal email request on some type of collaboration. I just go, hey, I really thought this would be cool if we worked on this together. What do you think? Is this something you'd be interested in? And they're like, sure. And so, and that's because I've spent that time building that trust first. And once that is established, then in a lot of cases, they'll approach you about things they want to collaborate on. They're like, I really like, as the tribe themselves will say, they're really interested in like, X, Y, or Z. We have a student here. He's a PhD candidate that's been working with Choctaw Nation for a long time, and they kind of brought him in here because they worked with him as a master's student and they wanted him to come here and to do some collaborative archaeology. And that has kind of that he's a great researcher, but because he also has that trust from Choctaw Nation and its indigenous communities, he's about to start a job at the Smithsonian before he's even finished his PhD. Um, and so I think one of the main things too is most of the uh, the tribes have some type of cultural heritage program or like people that you can contact. Honestly, I would just start off with like just a contact and don't tell them like you're going if you're a student, don't tell them that you're going there to do some research. Just introduce yourself, like just build a relationship. So if there's any like students out there that are trying to figure out how to take that first step, in a lot of cases, they have all the tribes usually have a website. Look on there, look at some of the contact people. But then they also go to, a powwow, go to one of their dances, go to stuff like that, and just introduce yourself to people. And then once that relationship is built, you can really get that collaboration going. And that's when kind of the real big benefits come through, especially if we're trying to, as anthropologists, understand the people of the past, get to know the people of today, like the descendants today, to really get that knowledge about people in the past and things like that. And so I think there's going to be, like I said, there's going to be a shift, but I think right now, I don't think it'll change much until we see the dinosaurs gone and the new faculty come in that have those relationships on the collaboration effort.
I'm also excited to see a lot more people who are themselves indigenous getting these degrees and doing their own research from from within their own community rather than, us coming from outside looking in. The whole concept of braided knowledge becoming more of the moment is also really exciting to me, that we're starting to see more of that.
Yeah, I think one of the cool things too. So growing up, there's a story that I was told, and it's about a Choctaw hunter and an alligator. And the story, what it really entails is game management theories. Is really what it's talking about, because there's the alligator tells the hunter that's having trouble hunting to not kill the doe, to not kill the small buck, to wait, and then they'll finally a large buck will come, and if he shoots the large buck, his hunting luck will keep going up from there. And what that story is really talking about is game management and principles and things like that, and that's something that we can really see in the archaeological record too. If you focus on studying things like that, is looking at like game management principles, and this kind of we can see that with um, the oral traditions and things like that from a lot of these um, tribes and stuff like that. And I think it's going to be really, really amazing as we get more indigenous students um, that want to be archaeologists. There's kind of right now, and this is changing as there's more, but in some cases, a lot of indigenous archaeologists right now have trouble within their own communities because archaeologists, because of the damage archaeology has done, that it's a hard role. It's like mentally within your own community, a hard role to fill when you're an archaeologist, when that profession in the past has done a lot to harm your people. But to kind of start riding the ship more, having those indigenous archaeologists is being a real beneficial to the entire field, the communities and the field in general. And it's an exciting thing to see.
Okay, so I guess we've been talking for over an hour now. So if we're just gonna like lay out some like bullet point style stuff for undergrads to ask their professors for if they're not already getting it. Um, you know, things to ask for to be trained in. I think the first thing is to ask for lab work.
Mm.
Because getting your hands on artifacts and having to like actually interact with them in bulk, like having
Yeah,
to see a lot of pottery, having to see a lot of debitage, having to see a lot of projectiles and like having to see it in bulk. Then when you're in the field digging shovel tests and you see a flake, it's a flake, it's not a rock.
yeah.
um so that would be my first recommendation. But do you have any others?
Yeah, so there, one of the things I think is really beneficial, and it was taught, like I said, Ed taught this before, um, is an archaeological methods class. That's usually kind of a 3,300 level class. And what that really gets you into is kind of a broad scope of um, what archaeology does. When I TA'd for one, and we did everything from showing them how to set up a unit to, following a compass, what their 30, how many steps to get their 30 meters in. Um, but we also introduced them to, lithic analysis, ceramic analysis, not in a lot of detail, but enough to where when you're in the field, you can identify those. Um, and I think classes like that, um, where you're just kind of exposed to what the archaeology methods are, kind of set the table for those, further educations and things like that. In a lot of cases, usually at a lot of these universities and things like that, the academic professors have research or like data sets that they don't want to go through themselves. And so you can take course hours to do that analysis. So uh, one of the big projects here at University of Oklahoma is on Spyro, this fantastic, amazing Mississippian period site. When we do the excavations out there, there's a lot of lithic materials, debitage that comes through it. So with them, I've set up a program to where they each semester 4 to 5 students, analyze lithic material in the same exact way that when I'm working for a CRM company, the same way I do the analysis there. And so when they've got that already in the job market, they can already go in somewhere. And I've had multiple students that go in somewhere and that have done those classes. They can go in and already work as a lab tech doing lithics because they've been trained on it and they spent an entire semester, some of them a year, doing that analysis. And so reaching out to your professors and seeing if there's any data sets that you can work on and turning that into a class hours. Most of them there's all universities there's some type of class that you can get registered into to where that counts as course hours. So that also goes to your degree. So you're not getting paid for it, but you're also you're not doing it for free in the way that it's getting you to your degree faster as well. It's not cutting you away from anything like that, and it's helping you prepare for the job market that's going to be coming after.
For sure. And when I was an undergrad, the first thing that like Tom would have us do is he'd take the 1/8 inch stuff and he'd just give us a bag of it and tell us to sort it. Like get rid of the little lumps of clay and all that,
Hmm.
sort out the shell, sort out the lithic, sort out the bone. Call me when you're done. I'll check it and make sure you're right, that kind of
Yeah.
thing. And if you were coming in on a volunteer basis to do stuff like that fairly regularly, then he'd be like, okay, I've got a lithic analysis for you to do.
Yeah,
um
exactly.
demonstrate that you're actually invested, and then he would let you do the analysis and like help you write the report and do the site file and stuff, because he's got all these like little ephemeral lithic lithic sites that don't have a whole
Yeah.
lot to them, but they still need a site file. And so you get the experience of filling out that form and all that. So like pretty much any program that you're going to be in, they're going to have something like this available to do it, but you might have to ask for it.
Yeah.
They're probably not going to advertise it too much. They've got other things on their plate.
One of the things too, if you're somewhere where if you're a student somewhere, an undergraduate, where there's a PhD program, in most cases, the PhD students will also have some data set that needs to get analyzed. So I've doing, my dissertation work covers 6 sites, and so there's lithic debutante from every single site that I've been going through. Um, and with that, I've had students come in and volunteer and then have course hours dedicated to do that because as a PhD student, I'm trying to graduate as soon as possible. So having students go through, I teach them and then they go through the data sets benefits both of us. They get their course hours and they learn on job, and then I don't have to do an analysis I've done countless times. Um, and so that's another thing too. If you're at a bigger universities that have PhD programs, reach out to some of the PhD students because a lot of them will have data sets that they need someone to go through. I've actually, and you may have seen this, but every time I have a second or third author, it's on either my publications or on my conference posters or papers and things like that. That's because those are students that have worked, and I give them student credit. So that also helps you with the job market. If you're a student, you're coming out with some cases, multiple conference presentations, or in some cases too, a publication. So that's a big benefit too if you're trying to hit either the job market or trying to get into graduate school somewhere.
Yeah, absolutely. The other thing that's harder to do in a classroom setting is like soils. But like trying to teach like silty clay versus silty clay loam and these kinds of things, that's one of the more on the job kinds of issues. But like there's got to be methodologies for like actually proactively training students to understand soil structure and texture. Like I've run into uh you know techs that have been in the field for 20 years who screw this up sometimes. um it's just one of those ephemeral data sets that you kind of learn on the fly and hope that you learned right.
Yeah, and those are one of the things. There's there's probably a way to do it, but my my guess is a lot of the if you're an archaeologist out working somewhere and you're hitting those different stratigraphy with the different soils and things like that. Um, you need to make sure you'd have to spend time to make sure somewhere is not a site first and then get those in there because otherwise you want that data from whatever's in that
Yeah.
soil. So something we have a geoarchaeologist here, and what she does is she takes students to along creek beds that have naturally eroded and shows them. But her classes are usually smaller. They're like directed reading, so usually at most 4 to 5 students. Um, but there's definitely still, like you mentioned, there's definitely still some things that just going to be on the job things. There's certain things like we can teach a student how to follow a compass. How many steps is it, 30 meters? But you're going to run into stuff in the field when you're out in the field that you're not. There's not in a classroom. We can't prep for like and make that and things like that. But I think for the most part, like the one of the big things that academia needs to do is not try to teach and solve every art like CRM based thing, but just give students a good enough foundation that when they get out there, they know enough to where they can adapt to those situations instead of just going in kind of completely blind.
Yeah, not
Uh,
having to learn everything all at the same time.
yeah, and just having those foundations, like standard archaeology methods, under they may not need to know how to write an APE or an MOA or anything like that, but understanding what those are is a big deal. And understanding what a transect is, how transects are laid out, basic artifact identification is another big one. And in
Also, just
some cases,
understanding like what phase one, two, and three are meant to do. Because like
yeah,
a lot of times you'll get people who are fresh out of school who see, the seasoned field techs just like flying through shovel tests and thinking they're being sloppy. But like the point of the shovel test survey is high volume, low resolution data real quick. You go back for phase two to get that high res data.
yeah,
We're not here to collect every flake. We're here to
yeah,
figure out where the flakes are. And that's
yeah.
it.
Yeah, I think kind of just we have, and I have access and I show these in my classrooms to like a one sheet of what section 106 is and the phases. And that's been really beneficial to just telling students like who may be interested in the field. Having just that, just to know kind of, what the process is, and just so when they they're not, students aren't going to go out and start like having to make a phase one or have to make a phase two or do some big giant, lead some, phase three mitigation project. But when they hear these things, knowing what that work's going to entail is a big thing for a lot of students. And I think that's one way, if they're familiar with those things, they can get, move from field tech to crew chief faster and get that, that pay bump and things like that.
Like I've heard stories of like, yeah, I wasn't there for this, but I've heard stories of like a brand new field tech coming to the field with a toolbox and no backpack and no water because they didn't know what a phase one was.
Yeah, yeah, no, that's the thing too, because field schools expose you to what like a phase two or a phase three is going to be, but in most cases they don't expose you to the phase ones, which is the large majority of archaeology's phase ones. There is kind of the good news is as these CRM projects have been taking off, I've been seeing more and more programs either split their field school where the first section or the first 2 weeks they do a phase one, and then the second section or three-fourths of it they do their standard field school excavations, or in some cases they'll have 2 4-week projects. So one, you'll have 4 weeks of doing phase one somewhere, um, and then the second is you'll have your standard field school that we kind of most people had experience how that feels.
Cool to hear
I
that.
think, yeah, I think, like I said, I think things are kind of shifting now to a better direction, but um, we're just now kind of starting to see that shift. So there's still going to be a long ways to go, but it seems that archaeology is really kind of finally starting to realize the path it needs to go.
I don't know if you have any more time, but I would like to hear a little bit about the like your work with Flint on the Joe Rogan
Oh, yeah.
um thing, like how you got involved with that. And like I know that you were mostly like providing information on indigenous monumental sites that didn't actually get brought up, but like what was he going to talk about
Yeah,
on that front?
yeah, I can talk about that. So, one of the big things that kind of got me into this space is when Ancient Apocalypse came out. Before then, I had a personal Twitter, but I wasn't like really archaeology involved and things like that. But it kind of got me into this field addressing some of the issues with pseudo archaeology, and one of my honestly my biggest thing with like ancient apocalypse wasn't so much how like Graham's theories or anything like that. It's just how much he lied about archaeologists. That's actually was my biggest critique of it and what really got me involved in this. So since then, I've spent a good amount of effort. Unfortunately, not as much as I'd like. I had made like 3 YouTube videos, but it's trying to do a PhD and make YouTube videos is not a fun time. Uh, but I've been a lot of time trying to address comments, and I find that most people that are actually um, like ancient theory or Graham Hancock fans and things like that just don't know enough to really know what archaeologists know and don't know. And I think that's one of the issues with Graham Hancock is that like he presents it as archaeologists only think this way. One of my favorites is like archaeologists don't use oral traditions to paint a picture of the like in their understanding or interpretations of the past, and a lot do. It's like I've read multiple books on the
And
subject.
have been for the last like almost 100 years.
Yeah, it's actually a pretty big part of archaeology, especially uh, here. There's like there's a thing called landscape approaches or landscape archaeology, with which I work in within as well. And a big part of that is oral traditions. Like that's one of the key things about landscape is understanding how the landscape was created. And there's been things like papers. There's a whole book where an archaeologist talked to indigenous Australians about the dream time and how that created the world. So like this is a big topic that we see all the time. Um, and so I've been trying to do that, and since I specialize in the indigenous Southeast, that to really kind of talk about what we know and the about these sites and things like that. And so when Flint got agreed to do that debate on Graham Hancock, Flint is he's a classical archaeologist, lives in the UK, and so he wasn't very familiar. And since Poverty Point, like I said, Mound A is right behind me, my master's work was on it. I've also done work on Mississippian mound sites uh, throughout time and things like that. And so what he really approached me about is kind of looking at what we know what we know about sites like Poverty Point or Cahokia, Moundville, and things like that, and then using that, and on top of that, talking about how a lot of oral traditions don't, one of Big Hancock's big thing is like oral traditions always talk about someone coming from the sea and starting civilization and things like that. That's always one of his big things. In most cases, in the southeast, the the people come from the ground. They actually don't come from the sea or anything like that. You get like Caddo, Choctaw, Chickasaw, a lot of their stories are more based on individuals coming from the ground, not coming from the ocean and starting civilization, their society and things like that. So, but Hancock doesn't say those things because that would be a counter to his argument. So, knowing some oral traditions myself and knowing information about these mound sites and things like that, Flint reached out to me to just provide a lot of information about like Poverty Point, for example. If this was a bringing in things from all over the world and things like that. We're not seeing that here. And actually, I spent time identifying raw materials, so lithic, all stone material that was coming to this place from all over. That I worked with an individual, an archaeologist named Phil Carr, who literally drove for a couple of weeks throughout the eastern woodlands looking for outcroppings to match the stone that we were finding here. And then there's also geochemical analysis done of the stone now too. So we know where the stone is and where it's coming from. And we're not seeing, these huge, not outside of North America trade network coming from here. We also don't see things like, full scale agriculture at sites during the late archaic and things like that. And that's luckily Ed did the faunal and paleobot for those things. And so we saw a lot of those things. And that was really what I was working with Flint on, is just showing what we do know about these mound sites and what we do and how we do use oral traditions in those cases, and how those oral traditions kind of also refute in a lot of cases that there was an ancient civilization. And so in these cases, we actually have a lot. And I think one of the Flint did really well. And I think it also really brought Joe Rogan into being interested too, is instead of just combating everything Hancock says, really just showing what archaeologists know, and
Yeah.
like the cool
the
things that we
whole
didn't know.
section where Flint's explaining like the domestication process and how you can see that like you could clip that out and show that in a Peabot class and
Mhm.
like be like that there it is, that's the explanation.
Yeah,
um
what's really funny is we've talked, me and him talked about it and stuff like that. And we had some like discussions beforehand about possible, talking points for everything like that. But his lecture for that is the same I give in my introduction to archaeology, on the, the start of agriculture and things like that. It's very similar discussion points and things like that. And so I think Flint did an amazing job at really talking about things archaeologists know, and how much one of his big things were these big data sets and things like that. And that's a big part of archaeology, especially if you're doing things like spatial analysis, which
yeah.
Dr. Hill does and things like that, is having these huge data sets where we're actually seeing, you know, getting these patterns and these pictures and these things that we're seeing, where if there was some huge anomaly, it would be showing up on these large data sets. And, when we're not seeing those big anomalies, instead we're seeing, what our interpretations or our understanding of the past is based on those big data sets. They're not based on, us just going out and having a feeling. They're based on those huge amounts of data. My, the multiple, just in mind, like Eastern Oklahoma, the amount of like just slope data, environmental data that I'm using to get movement patterns and environmental yields in the past and things like that are just these huge data sets, using these programs that, you have to have a pretty strong computer to even run the program to be able to run it. And that's just looking at one element of the stuff I'm trying to look at. And I think Flint did a really good job of showing about how big these data sets are in a lot of cases for these sites. Or
The other thing that I was really happy to see from him was that he was fully prepared to address Hancock's ideas on the merits and not bring up the issue of Ignatius Donnelly and the National Socialist Associations with all these
yeah,
ideas. He was ready to go on the merits, and Hancock decided to pick that fight.
yeah,
And it kind of that was kind of one of the weaker areas of the debate. It kind of devolved from there because like most people are just not, they don't want to have that discussion, and we don't really need to.
yeah,
We can address Hancock on the merits of his arguments without ever bringing that up.
yeah,
um it is a problematic aspect of the fact that he refuses to acknowledge why that's a problem. um
yeah,
is just it's his own complicity with the issue and what he's shoving back out into the world. But we don't have to address it on those levels, and I really wish that Hancock had left that alone and just let it be on the merits. But
yeah.
I thought Flint did a decent job of in the moment being able to clarify that despite being interrupted over and over and over again.
Yeah, and that was one thing that we talked about too. That I brought up. I was like, we all know that it's going to get brought up like that. There was never a plan for us to bring it up on the archaeology side, but we were prepared to if Hancock decided to bring it up, what to do. And one of the things too is, like you were mentioning, is just that it's not an acknowledgement, and that's one of the issues I have um, with kind of a lot of people who believe in these ancient civilizations or use these tales of Atlantis and stuff like that. And in most cases, like I don't think Hancock's racist. I most people that believe in an ancient civilization or things like that. I don't think they're racist. I mean, I have personal friends, even though I'm an archaeologist, that just they don't know a lot about archaeology, that may think that there could be an ancient civilization. It's just that acknowledging that there's a history of it that has a problem. Just like I've said several times during this actual thing that there's a one with archaeology too. The anthropology and archaeology have hurt indigenous people as well, and then some of there's dinosaurs that still do. But it's kind of like there's that lack of acknowledgement that can become that's like just the real issue. I think most kind of people archaeologists have an issue is just that there's a lack of acknowledgement about it, and I personally think that's probably not something that either side's ever going to agree on. I my interactions with a lot of people is when archaeologists point to those things, the individuals are kind of they get defensive. I understand.
Yeah,
Um,
it's
but
alienating.
yeah,
It does not serve to improve our relationship with the public in general,
yeah,
or at least a certain faction of the public in general. Other factions, typically, the indigenous factions and the more marginalized factions, do appreciate that we're willing to pick that fight, but it's they're only one part of a bigger whole that we're trying to talk to.
yeah. And so, but I think I agree. I think one of the best ways to just kind of have these discussions about sites or these kind of sites or locations that are being used to propose this ancient lost advanced civilization is how Flint did with targeting just about like talking about how much data archaeologists have, and then kind of somewhere within there talking about okay, well, since we know that um, we have all this data about trade going on in the eastern woodlands or something like that between these sites during the later okay, okay, why do we have all that data, but that we're missing the data for this ancient civilization type of
Like,
thing? Yeah.
why are we watching? I don't know if you saw the paper that Buchanan and David Kilby and a bunch of other people were on, but they did a Bayesian reanalysis of a bunch of Clovis and Folsom projectile sites, and Folsom shows up about 200 years before Clovis ends. It emerges within Clovis, and you can actually, so it's this whole narrative about like Clovis disappears and is just suddenly erased. That's not what happens. You can actually watch Clovis turn into Folsom
Yeah.
over like a 200-year period, and then the Younger Dryas hits. They're like the mammoths go, and so no one's making Clovis anymore because they don't need them.
Yeah.
um it like we have the data sets to combat these narratives about cultural erasures and cataclysms and all these other things that, I mean, was the Younger Dryas a bad time? Yeah, it seems to have been a pretty bad time, but did it exterminate entire cultures? No,
Yeah.
that's not what the record reflects.
Yeah, and I think those I think if archaeology is moving this direction, and um, I don't think it's primarily academic led. I think it's actually like individuals like you and things like that that are putting out these YouTube channels or putting out open access stuff. So like one thing I try to do is like all my papers and posters and everything like that are open access. So I share them on my social media after I present them is showing this data. And I think that is one of the best ways to address a lot of people. Like I said, because I think in most cases, people just don't know how much data behind the archaeology there is. And so talking about it and showing all this data, I think will really, as people, I think the people that are like die hard Hancock fans, they're never gonna change their mind
No.
anyway, so it doesn't matter. But as like more people are coming into the space, if they're seeing how much data that archaeologists have, and you know, and if archaeologists are arguing along, it's like, okay, this is our interpretation based on all this data, and then they see why those comments are being made by archaeologists or why those statements are being made by archaeologists. And then once all that data is shown, it's a lot easier for that person to realize, oh, okay, this is what all the if I'm actually worried about like the science of it, this is what the science is saying, not that an ancient civilization built the mounds or something like that. Um, and so that I think is going a long way too, is just making archaeological data, or at least not possibly not the raw data, but making the data for the conclusions and everything like that more accessible is going to be
Hmm.
one of the big ways to combat the future of pseudoarchaeology. Maybe not right now because there's, like I said, I think most people are just kind of entrenched in it if they already get to it, but kind of as we're progressing along, um, making archaeology more accessible and the data that we utilize more accessible, I think is a big benefit.
So one thing that I want to throw out into the world, because I proposed this when I was at Tennessee, um, is like we're all having to read all these papers and then present on them and summarize them in class every week. Like that's what we have to do. PowerPoints, the whole nine yards. I want to see a grad program start a YouTube channel where they instead of in class presenting, their summary of these papers, make a video, upload it to the, grad program archaeology YouTube channel so that this information becomes more accessible. And once that channel gets to 1,000 subscribers, you can monetize it and it's generating revenue for the graduate program for, whatever, like we were trying to get parking spaces for the graduate students. Well, that is a passive revenue stream for the graduate program to do that I think would be really cool to start seeing that kind of information made very public in a very accessible format.
I think too, yeah, and I think one of the big things too is in most cases, when you have like their capstone classes in undergrad, or people's their art theory paper before when they get into masters, and their thesis or dissertation stuff, have those on the program. Usually, all of those papers, all those will show their data. They'll show where they got the conclusions, and in most cases almost all archaeologists will talk about the stuff they're researching on. I mean, I spent time talking about my dissertation research in the middle of this, and we were originally starting talking about CRM. Archaeologists love talking about the research they do. So utilize that with the students and let them share their data with large audiences and stuff like that. And if a student doesn't want to, they don't have to. But I think in a lot of cases, students will present, in every class, graduate level class that I've been in, and every capstone class I've seen, at the end of the semester, students have to give a presentation. And so, if the student agrees with it, let them film the presentation and upload it to YouTube and things like that. And those are ways to get, you know, a big diversity of data coming in through there, because in a lot of cases, like if there was I took a grad class on archaeological science methods, and I talked about PXRF and church quartzite materials. At the same time, another student was, and I talked about that in Oklahoma. And then at the same time, there was a student who presented on isotope analysis for rats to look at migration of people using it as a database to look at migration of people in Utah. And like those, so you have a huge amount of diversity in those classes a lot of time that could hit a lot of different target audiences at once with just having students talk about their research on the YouTube channel.
Also, why is SAA and SEAC not recording their presentations and putting them online? Like,
Yeah, I didn't. I actually had asked that question about SA because um, there were several. I mean, you were there. There were several times where like a paper was at the same time as another paper I wanted to see, and it was like, oh, I'll just watch it, but they're not recorded anymore. Um, and I don't know. Someone said it may be a funding thing, like there's not enough money to do it, but I don't really know though. I would like it to be. One of the things that I'm kind of glad about is now though, is that most of them are now being streamed on Zoom, at least when they're occurring. And not all the conferences, but some of the conferences are, affordable if you're really that interested in archaeology, affordable enough to where you can spend, in a lot of cases, 4 or 5 days just watching every single archaeology related talk you could ever think of. At SAA, I was going to papers about Crete, and then I would go to another one about smelting in ancient China. Like I would go into a bunch of different things, and so I'm hoping that that online element can be kind of shifted to an open access, like public engagement type of forum going forward.
Like I see the issue with like not wanting to publish a video before a paper is formally published, but like you can put a 1 year, 2 year embargo on the video and have it go up after the fact. Like
Yeah,
that kind of like permission system could be developed. And it's probably the kind of thing that we're going to need to like find get an NSF grant to fund, to have like a camera and an operator with microphones in every room, to do that kind of thing, and maybe hire like a video editor or something. But like I think for the health of the discipline and our relationship with the general very interested public, we need to start making that information curated and available online for people who want to find it.
yeah, I think so too, and I think I mean we're entering into a more well we've been in it for a while, but um, the field's finally kind of shifting to this more digital age. I'm hoping as that continues that we see this shift in um, how a lot of this is accessible to the general public and things like that. And I would what one thing I would like love to see in the future is if for like the general public, if they don't want to attend all of SA or anything like that, like a day pass, or like they do it Comic Con and stuff like that, a day pass, or if you just want to, buy a session, like you just buy the recordings for an entire session or something like that. Um, and so that way, someone who doesn't want to, I don't even know what SAA costs to the general public, but I'm guessing it's a couple hundred.
Yeah, it was
Um,
like almost 300 for someone who has no affiliation with anything.
yeah, and so, but if you sell a session for $10, and someone's like, I'm just really focused on, you know, ancient Maya iconography or something, and you go, okay, well, $10 will get you, a 4 hour discussion, 4 hours worth of discussions on it. For the enthusiasts, really curious about Maya um, iconography, I think that would be worth. And in some cases, like people have their interest in having these sessions already recorded and available for if someone wants to, just a session instead of a whole, the whole conference or something like that. I think would be beneficial too going forward.
Also for researchers, because like sometimes I will hear about research that's going on that I never would have found out about if I hadn't been at the conference. But if there's other stuff that like looking at the like soil genetic research that Esko Villerslev has been doing, and a
Mhm.
lot of his other like ADNA stuff, I would not have known to look for his papers on that stuff if I hadn't found him giving presentations on YouTube about it.
Yeah.
Like that kind of accessibility helps researchers as much as it does the general public.
Yeah. I mean, there's so many people working on so much stuff. Like there's people at I've never seen before working on, and you may have been in this talk too, like ritualized violence during the late archaic. And I did not know she was ever working on any of that stuff, and that was her dissertation research. She had actually finished, and I have never seen her name before until uh, this one, because a lot of the research, like if I'm reading an older report from like if I'm doing my dissertation stuff and I'm reading an older report on like bioarc that's been done, it was probably like, I think the last one sometimes did bioarc on it was 2014. So all of their sources are before 2014. And so this new student coming in and doing stuff, um, I didn't know about because I was reading a 2014 reports and seeing all the stuff that those people had done. And so getting like a lot more exposure is really beneficial to a lot of researchers, myself included, um, in those cases.
All right. Well, we're coming up on 2 hours of yapping about this stuff. So, if is there anything else that you want to talk about? Because if not, I'll let you go about your day.
Yeah, so I guess my last point really is that accessibility has always been a big thing for me. Like I said, I was a railroad worker. I really never thought about a life in archaeology. Um, but if you're really interested in making kind of a life out of archaeology, even if you're not a student now, you may be doing something else. That it is possible. I went back to school when I was 28. After my first semester back in, I took an introduction to archaeology class, and I was like, "Oh, this is what I want to do." And so, if you're really interested in archaeology, there's opportunities for people, and I think people with diverse backgrounds knowing railroading has come in handy for me in CRM projects before because we there was an old line that had got decommissioned, and we were finding stuff, and I was like, "Oh, I know what those things are in the field because I was a railroader." And so I think having a lot of people that maybe have diverse backgrounds that get into the field later is also something that's really beneficial too, is because your archaeology is interdisciplinary. So having those other skill sets are really beneficial to archaeology. So if you're, interested in archaeology but think maybe it's not for you, um, look into the different fields. I am on Twitter. I can share my socials on here. Um, Reach out to me. I can talk to you about what kind of jobs there are, what kind of things you maybe that would maybe align with your things and stuff like that. But it's the field benefits from people with diverse backgrounds and diverse thoughts coming into the field, and so that's just kind of my last point is like it still can be for you even if you already graduated college and you may maybe being a mechanic for 5 years, stuff like that is still beneficial to archaeology if you decide to come back, like go back to school or switch to a different career path and go into archaeology. Your skill set is still extremely valuable. I've had mechanics that we were needed when we were on CRM projects too before, so like it's valuable skill sets and stuff like that that from diverse backgrounds I think should encourage you to actually get into the field instead of thinking that it's the thing that's keeping you from it.
Absolutely. Yes. Well, thank you so much for joining me for this and all your insights. And it was good seeing you at SAA. I hope I see you
Yeah,
at SEAC.
yeah. No, thank you for having me. Yeah, I really appreciate it.
All right. Well, I'll let you go. See you around.
All right, thank you.